Welcome to the CPACE Alliance 2024 legislative wrap-up. Just like 2023, this year has been a very busy legislative session for CPACE. And I've asked Nick to lead today's presentation, but before turning it over to him, I wanted to acknowledge the capital providers on the legislative committee who have invested significant time and money to make this successful. That is Petros, Nuveen, Pace Equity, Pace Loan Group, Bayview, Castle Green, Peachtree, and there were also contributions that were made by Green Rock, Northbridge, Imperial Ridge, Inland Green Capital, and many others added their voice and advocated for the legislation that we're going to be reviewing here. I would not for a moment say that these are CPACE Alliance legislative wins. Legislation passes, of course, due to many folks in the industry, folks adjacent to our industry, and the legislators who ultimately vote for or the governors who sign these bills. And the CPACE industry owes its thanks to all who supported, testified, or otherwise contributed to helping us get over the finish line with with this legislation. I just wanted to say that, and you'll hear more about this from Nick, that any legislation requires an amazing amount of persistence. I think every single success here was a success that took more than 1 year. And every case we had to be adaptable to local circumstances and local conditions. But our consensus goal in every case is to look for efficiency and predictability in project evaluation and an ease of presenting the information in the application process. So I hope that you come away from today's webinar with a appreciation for all the work that went into it from many different folks. And Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you now. So by all means, take it away.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much, Cliff, for that. Really, I think, definitely a noteworthy introduction in this case to say that this is always a very much a group effort. It's not always one organization, one individual, I think, what makes this all happen. It requires us herding everybody together, these different kind of stakeholders, to get any of these legislations through and done successfully. So I definitely echo those sentiments here today. So again, good afternoon, everyone, and we definitely welcome you here again to our CPACE legislative wrap-up for 2024, which is actually one of the first one of these that we've ever done too. So we're definitely happy to have you all here to hear about what has taken place across the country this year in terms of getting legislations passed to continue expanding and growing the CPACE market nationally. So again, first, before I do launch in, just a kind of reminder of who CPACE Alliance is. So again, we are a coalition of capital providers and transaction experts committed to achieving the public benefits of CPACE by, again, increasing this quantity of high quality financing transactions. And of course, among the different ways, and of course, that we're doing this is through basically our thought leadership on basically, leading on these different efforts to advocate for new legislations passing in these different states across the country and even improving upon them even when they were passed, in this case, previously. So that's kind of what was the hallmark of the different kind of activities we also did this year, which we'll go into more specific, give you more specific information about that as we move along into this webinar. But basically, I'm sorry, for those who are currently just joined us, please make sure you mute yourselves before basically we do continue with the webinar today. So we would appreciate that.
To their buildings using energy efficiency, renewable energy, and
Matt Carswell, you're the one who I think is talking. Great, thank you so much. So then moving on to in terms of what we're going to be talking about this afternoon. So first, we'll just give you a quick overview and kind of our reflections of what happened this session. And then we're going to take you down then to the ground level in terms of particular states that we did do work in. So those that are listed here in terms of the 2024 activity.
It will be covered by
And
Samsung.
basically, Then we'll touch on even some of those states where we were not as successful, but we did still try to get some work done in getting CPACE bills to progress this year. And then kind of a look forward to what we maybe expect to do for the rest of this year and into 2025. And then if time permits, we'll definitely get to some of your questions, and then we hope to give you some answers. Okay. So basically, in terms of the landscape this year, we did work in a number of different states to try and get either new legislations passed. So that includes states like Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina, down in the deep South states here. And then also working our way even to the other part of the Sun Belt in the Southeast, the Southwestern part of the United States, which included states like Arizona, for example, where we tried to do some work there. And then there were definitely some other states in and around which had existing legislations too, where we were also trying to improve upon the existing statutes that are on the books. So that included in states like Florida, for example, and as well as in New York, were among those different kind of states too, where we tried to get some work done to improve upon the legislations that were on the books currently. And so, this again was just a bit of the landscape again of, where we certainly were doing the work. And, we'll definitely get into more specifics about, what it had entailed in each of those states. But before we get to that, just some, again, actual, particular reflections, I think, that we have in terms of what we had done in this past legislative session. So first, in terms of the primary messaging we had to go and use, whenever we go into any of these states, we definitely like to come with a balanced message, where not only are you going to tout the environmental benefits in terms of reducing energy consumption or even other forms of natural resource consumption that we are always targeting when we develop these CPACE legislations, but it's also about that we are fostering economic development and private investment that's going to come into the state when that private investment maybe wasn't there before. So that it becomes this kind of a boon for all these different states to bring in all this additional investment. So again, that it's helping people to go and do these kinds of projects and get even more tangible benefits that will help all these local communities within their states. Then in terms of what our strategic priorities were for this past year, we were looking to begin to fill out this map even more with a real emphasis and a focus in basically the Sun Belt, right? So basically that southwestern and southeastern corners, as we mentioned just shortly ago, to target those states in this case to begin getting them to have their own legislations in place. And of course, we are also very opportunistic. So whenever we see an opportunity that might arise that maybe we didn't originally plan to have as part of our initial strategic priorities for a year, we definitely always try to find a way to see if we can get that bill finished in a more effective and efficient manner in this case. And I think we can say there's one example of that in terms of or actually even a couple of different examples really of that in terms of our successes this year where that was the case. And then we just simply moved in to get those legislations done. And then certainly, as Cliff mentioned, and I'll just certainly gloss over again, it definitely takes persistence to get these legislations done because it can become maybe a 1 to 2 or even possibly longer effort to get any of these legislations done. And so that persistence is definitely necessary. And as well as patience is also involved in that too, to ensure that where we're staying on their radar and making sure that then we're pushing these legislations forward. And then certainly too, it's also very important that whenever we create these legislations, that it's always going to conform and work within the current state law, because we certainly want to make sure that any of these particular legislations we're putting through, that it can stand up, that the lien then that's created in this case as part of basically doing these transactions can be created and be enforced whenever basically you're going to do these projects. So we want to make sure that it conforms with the letter of the law and that we can get these legislations passed and it can be above board. And then we certainly also make sure there's consensus, certainly among our membership in this case to make sure, and as well as for all the stakeholders we're working with on the ground about what CPACE principles are being put into these legislations. And so, we definitely always want to make sure everybody's comfortable with what approach we're going to go with. So we're creating these kind of well-designed and well-functioning legislations that will turn into those very same well-designed and well-functioning programs when we go and launch them for basically getting these transactions completed. there's always definitely a lot of education that happens, that we're always having to talk to key parties to make sure that they understand how it is that you're getting what they're getting themselves into to go and set up and create a CPACE program and putting that legislation into place. So certainly the legislators who we have to work with, the counties and municipalities who are key for doing billing, collection, and enforcement usually for any of these transactions. The bankers who are going to be responsible certainly for providing consent on these transactions to occur. And then, of course, a host of other kinds of constituencies who we have to work in along the way. It could be, economic development agencies and other kinds of stakeholders that could be out there. So then the next point in terms of engaging with local council, that's really still part and parcel of then making sure that we understand what the state law is telling us about how we need to design and then make sure that we're conforming the CPACE law to be working within the confines of the state laws. So that's where hiring a local council is key and important so that we make sure we do have a functional CPACE legislation in place. And then certainly having lobbyists that we usually do hire and have to represent us on the ground to get a legislation through is also very key and critical in the success of getting a legislation passed. And then certainly we definitely have to do a lot of collaboration and negotiation with legislators to make sure that they're comfortable to pass a legislation. A lot of that collaboration and negotiation had to happen certainly in states like Hawaii, for example, where we had to get comfortable, get people comfortable, and as well as other constituencies and banking associations also had to be comfortable. So as an example of that, of getting everybody on the same page. And then certainly, and as Cliff also noted, obviously that our members do financially support these efforts. So that's where the financial resources come in. And we certainly, again, thank them for all their support and what they've given to us to help get these legislations through. And then certainly we also tap into the policy expertise of our members as well, and making sure that they're bringing to the fold all their expertise to make sure that we know how we're basically getting these legislations through in a way that they want to see it. So all of that together is definitely why we've been, I think, as successful as we've been, certainly in these past few years to get these legislations, over the finish line. And then certainly all these legislations that we've been getting through of late, they include things like financing of resiliency, water conservation, and as well as other kinds of things like microgrids, other kinds of these particular kind of improvements where we're rapidly expanding what CPACE can actually cover rather than still the traditional energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. And so that is where we're still seeing more receptivity now from stakeholders in the newer states that we're going to include those even kinds of improvements so that we're continuing to expand the power and really the promise of what CPACE can bring to commercial property owners across the country. And then within the last couple of years, states have now been starting to move away from having basically what's been known as these savings to investment ratios, or SIR for short, and then moving to the point of getting loan to value limits put in instead as being that guardrail for not making, having any kind of runaway financing in this case occurring when you're using the CPACE mechanism in this case in any of these states. And basically, SIR has been going away because we recognize that you can't really include all of these benefits, and we can't find ways to monetize what all the benefits are when you do a CPACE project. So that then becomes a limiting factor, really, and getting basically a more comprehensive project done, rather than basically then say with the loan to value requirement that can actually increase and basically get more of a kind of a project done in this case. And really not leave any savings on the table, so to speak. We've been moving to that kind of way of putting a guardrail in place for basically doing these financings. And then certainly too, we've seen as time has gone on, there's been now different ways to manage basically the kind of administrative model of CPACE programs across the country. That is not necessarily now just a statewide administrator type model. Now we've been moving to seeing even a decentralized form of administering these programs. So where basically local governments will create their own programs rather than having one single statewide administrator where then all those localities opt into the central program in this case. And so, but of course, it does depend on, you know, the kind of what is the local sort of legal and institutional context in this case. We have to take that into account about what model is going to fit the best. So statewide, you know, we might have seen that that's better for maybe in a context like Maine, Hawaii, and New Mexico, but in a decentralized fashion, we're seeing that in other states like Georgia, Idaho, and Tennessee, that decentralized method was better in terms of being accepted and then getting the legislation passed. So it's not a one size fits all in terms of how basically you administer a program. You have to judge it by what's the comfort level is in any particular state. And then if the program administrator duties are decentralized, then CPA, we've hired legal counsel in the past to develop a model set of transactional documents and as well as the programmatic documents to basically help with you know, these different jurisdictions considering to go and create their own programs. So they just got that ready set model of documents that they can use, and then basically just go ahead and pass an ordinance and then be able to enact in a program on the local level using that model guidelines and what we kind of be calling like a check the box type model for basically approving of applications. And so those really certainly are certainly the main kind of reflections that we have and what we've been noticing and seeing out generally in the marketplace as we continue to get new legislations passed all across the country. All right, so then with that overview kind of, you know, now put to the side, now let's kind of go on down to the local level here and start to look at what we did in each of the states that we focused on this particular year. Okay, so first, I want to start with the state of Georgia, where we were successful in enacting a legislation this year. And as Cliff again noted before, and I'll reiterate, so this was also one of those persistent efforts where it took multiple years of, you know, our hard work and multiple sessions to get basically a legislation passed in the state of Georgia. Now, in terms of some major features of the bill that passed, which was HB 206, property owners had to apply. Basically, property owners are applying to a local development authority or what's also known as a downtown development authority that are created by each county within the state of Georgia. Now, in which case, there's 139 separate counties in the state of Georgia itself who have possibly one or even more of those authorities. And the idea here is that the capital provider is going to lend to the actual development authority, and then the authority funds the improvements then for that commercial property owner in this case. And then a voluntary assessment that then goes onto the property by basically the local government. And then the tax commissioner would then collect and remit those payments back to the authority, which in turn then remits payments to that capital provider. Now, in terms of what we were saying, in terms of the expansion of the improvements that CPACE can cover, we did that also here in the state of Georgia. So the traditional improvements of energy efficiency and renewable energy are here, but so is also water conservation and resiliency type improvements. They too can also be financed in this state. And then in terms of what we're talking about in terms of guardrails, so we'd also utilize the loan to value type requirement in this case with a max loan to value requirement of 25%. In terms of the CPACE portion of a project, and then not anything more than 80% when you're factoring in for other forms of debt that might have been affixed to the property itself. And then in terms of what's been successful, obviously, in getting this done and the hard work that really went into getting Georgia's legislation passed, it started first with one of our capital provider members, being Peachtree Group. They basically had gotten the ball rolling initially with having multiple in-person meetings and really engaging with legislators and other key personnel in the state government to get the conversation going. And then certainly when they felt they had made enough progress, that's when then they looped CPA into the conversation. And that's when in the last couple of years, we've been then trying to push forward with getting a CPACE legislation passed, then utilizing all the different resources that certainly we've said are useful for basically getting a CPACE legislation passed. And then so we, as also too has been said, we worked with a local council, of that being of Nelson Mullins, who helped us to design the program and put that into the legislation, and also making sure that this conformed with the state constitution, because this was actually, one of those kind of like interesting dynamics in the state, is that we had to be sure that this actually had conformed with the state constitution. And so our legal counsel was very pivotal in this process to make sure that we were not in any way in conflict with the state's constitution. And so that's where certainly they were helpful, and then that they designed the program to be sure that then everything was in line. So now this is where actually now I'm going to go and bring in one of our capital provider partners in this case, who was actually did work hand in hand with us on getting the legislation passed, and that being Nuveen Green Capital. So I'm going to call on actually David Schatz from Nuveen Green Capital to come in and talk a little bit about how we kind of coordinated and worked with our two lobbying firms respectively to help get it done, and maybe we'll even touch on a little bit on what the next steps that have to come. So David, why don't you take it away and talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. A few things to highlight. I mean, I think going into this session, this is arguably one of the largest markets without a statewide CPACE law, so the stakes were very high. And this is a huge win to get. Two things to highlight here. The education necessary throughout this bill, drafting and passage process, I just can't say enough about. I think it was dead about 3 separate times in the process of passage. Multiple points were needed for education of the sponsor, education of the powerful members of the assembly to get this across. And that is exactly what the coalition went and did. And so bringing together the right folks at the right time with the right message, sometimes going even in front of a whole caucus just to tell the story of CPACE and what it would do for the state. The other major point I would make is just conforming to this local complexity that Georgia has at its constitution. I believe that there's tax provisions that would prevent CPACE in the way that we see it in other states to be enabled in Georgia. We had, just as that third point under resources, second and third point under resources says, having Nelson Mullins on board to really write the program specifically for Georgia so that it was an airtight case that we could make in front of the legislature, I think was absolutely critical. And so, it was just signed into law very recently within the last few weeks. The next steps are doing exactly what Nick laid out on a previous slide, which is engaging local counsel once again to draft documents in these next few weeks so that they're available to the development authorities across the state. And we can start opting in counties with draft documents that are all aligned, all on the same page, and importantly, conform to the statute in a uniform way. And that's what we're looking for when we go after new markets like this. So I know we have many states to get to, a lot of wins. And I'll wrap by saying, it's glad to be going into these next steps and formally bring it online.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you so much, David, for that other additional perspective here. And yeah, we're definitely at that stage now to get the programs rolled out. And we definitely are looking forward to those next steps in the weeks and months ahead. All right, so then let's go to Idaho in this case, which was an unexpected surprise because this was not one of the CPA's efforts in this case that we were leading on. This was actually something that was championed by Michael Yockey of Petros Pace Finance. And so, as a matter of fact, I think I'm just going to already turn it over to you, Michael, and you can just describe to everybody here what basically is in the bill that passed, and then how were you successful this year with getting this date that none of us were really expecting. So why don't you take it away?
Thanks. Thanks, Nicholas. And I mean, everyone here can see the slide, and I'm not going to sort of repeat it. Anyone who knows me knows I have this thing that I label CPACE 3.0, which is one where you have all the goodies involved: energy, water, resiliency, renewables, into one pot, where you create a mechanism that is as close to what I call sort of the Washington, Tennessee model of check the box for approval of documents, for approval of applications as possible. Just basically trying to create a statute that creates as much guidance and direction as possible for local governments, so they're not stuck trying to figure out how to make it work. And again, one of the things I'm just going to state is that, as in Idaho and in Georgia and some other states as well, you make a choice between whether or not can you do a statewide model or can you do one where, or statewide admin, which is a subset of statewide model, and or derivation thereof, or local government. It really sort of depends on, for lack of a better word, the politics of the state. And in some of the more conservative states, the idea of a statewide entity having control is frowned upon by legislators. You ask them about that, and they say, "I don't want that to happen. I want local governments to be in control." That's sort of how Tennessee evolved. That's how Idaho evolved as well. And this is a good example of legislation by opportunity. Toward the end of last session in 2023, a developer and a lobbyist approached me. I quickly threw together a bill, but it was too late in the session, but it proved a marker for discussions during the off season with the bankers and other key people, so that when you have what I call rocket dockets, very short term legislative sessions, you can get everything out of the way as much as possible in terms of stakeholders, and then move it forward very quickly. And Idaho passed in a matter of, I think, 4 weeks from the time of introduction to the time that it passed its legislature to the time it was signed by the governor. Still think the record is still 3.5 weeks, and that was Tennessee, but Idaho came pretty darn close. And again, this is the kind of thing where timing and opportunity and the ability to take advantage of that is really key. And that's how a number of states have come forward, and Idaho will be no exception. Right now, we're working with a firm with lawyers in Idaho, a major firm, because not too many big firms are in Idaho, but frequently neighboring states do have attorneys who work there. And so we have a firm that's going to be working on the model set of documents for Idaho, based again very much on the Washington, Tennessee type model that we can then begin shopping to the local county or municipalities, depending on which one has a more favorable path to passage. So Idaho, nice win. Hopefully we'll have model docs before the summer is out, and we can start working with communities in the fall to get them adopted. There we go.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you so much, Michael. And again, of course, again, kudos to you and congratulations certainly for leading on this effort and heeding certainly the people who came to you to put this all together. So, yeah, as Michael said, definitely more to expect certainly later this year with a program that'll be launched. All right, so now let's turn to the state of Hawaii, in which case there was obviously a legislation that was passed previously, but when we basically had started the process then of trying to get basically the local counties to opt in, we found with this process that we were hearing from locations like the city of Honolulu, for example, that they're saying, well, why aren't condominiums part of this? That's a good portion of what our commercial properties are within our community. Why can't we have that as being considered a commercial eligible property? And so we heard that message loud and clear. And then certainly too, with concerns, obviously, what happens with a major wildfire, obviously within Hawaii, why can we make it clear about fire sprinkling and basically fire suppression systems in place? So knowing that, we obviously felt that it would be probably best addressed to address that in the actual state statute in this case. And so that became the genesis really for getting a new legislation passed to amend the legislation that was on the books. It was for addressing those particular concerns. And then at the same time, we recognized that counties also didn't have much of an eagerness to want to administer the program. And so basically in hearing that, we've designed a way to have it where then HGIA, or the Hawaii Green Infrastructure Authority, to be responsible for basically administering the program themselves, rather than having it go through the counties. That also too was another issue that was addressed with this particular legislation. But then let me pass it now to my colleague Sal Tarzia from Castle Green Finance, who was very heavily invested in trying to get this done with us. And he will touch on really how more will be successful with getting this done, and then what we need to do next for rolling out the program. So why don't you go ahead and take it away, Sal?
Sure. Okay, there we go. All right, yeah, I mean, first of all, just giving some credit where it's due, kudos to Michael, who did a lot of the heavy lifting and was on the forefront of this. Also want to say that this initiative probably wouldn't have been possible without a governmental entity as a program administrator who was extremely supportive, was very open to the feedback that we gave them, not only open, but also inquisitive about how they could put together the best program, and was really instrumental in making this happen. As Nicholas alluded to, we originally passed a state statute. It got done extremely quickly. I believe from beginning to end, the initial statute was done in about 100 days. The resistance really started with the local opt-in, where the individual municipalities and their treasurers were reluctant to be the ones that had to pursue enforcement if enforcement were to come up. It was originally thought that they would be able to simply delegate that authority to HGIA, which, as it turned out, that turned out to be unconstitutional within the state of Hawaii. So we had to very quickly pivot and change the statute so that it would be a statewide program. While it has all of the elements of a traditional PACE, it is not a true PACE. It is considered a governmental lien. So, to any of us in terms of enforcement, to any of our investors, to the rating agencies, it should be exactly the same. We had a very good call last week with M4, who is the attorney that worked on behalf of HGIA. They've given us every indication that granting an opinion for the program should be no issue. They've got a little work to do before they put it in writing for us. But barring any conflict of interest with their representation with HGIA, we should have that critical element covered. It is one of the most robust, if not the most robust, PACE programs in the country in terms of eligible improvements. This is due to both the geographic elements of Hawaii being subject to not only earthquakes but also hurricanes, as well as some of the basic needs, as Nicholas started to cover, fire suppression systems, and also certain elements that are unique to the state. The governor did sign it last week, so it is official, and we will have a legal program by July 1st when it goes into effect. What remains to be done is some cleanup on the program guidelines, as well as adhering those final guidelines and the final statute to all of the documents which are currently in draft form. And we're all working with HGIA to comment and implement those.
All right, well, great. Thank you so much, Sal. I think, that definitely does, cover and encompass everything that we did with that. So I appreciate that a lot. And I'm sure that our audience found that very educational. All right, with that said, now let's move down to Florida in this case. So this was certainly also very one of those persistent and long efforts that we tried to do to improve upon how we would manage and administer the CPACE program alongside certainly the counterpart RPACE program that is also enacted and allowed to be done within the state of Florida. So here also to let me go ahead and turn over to Michael Yockey from Petros Pace Finance. He can tell you a little bit more about what we had to do here, and then certainly how we were finally successful after all these years. So Michael, go ahead.
Thanks, Nicholas. Well, for the first thing, that this is a bill that has passed the legislature. It is sitting on the governor's desk. He has until essentially July 1st, which is the effective date of the bill, to actually get around to signing it. So we're counting the days, or he can make a decision to let it go into effect without signature. So I would say 95% it's done, but there's still 5% of who knows what could happen. We do know that this is one of those things where it's a well-developed market with a well-used statute. But the fact is that we have had friction over the past 5 years or so because of concerns about the R-PACE industry, and the statute, like California, does not distinguish between commercial and residential. It is simply PACE. So each year, the residential folks have been put under pressure to do legislation to fix the consumer protection issues. And because they were being forced to do that, we had to come in and essentially join in that bill to make sure that whatever happened didn't unintentionally affect us. And for the last 3 to 4 years, we've been playing defense on these bills because the drafters didn't understand how to make that distinction. This last session, in this session, we went on the offense and sought to aggressively clarify the two and make distinctions between CPACE and R-PACE, such that this bill will now distinguish between a commercial program under 163.0812 in the residential program, which is 163.081. Before it was just 08, and that was it. Now there's a subset 1, subset 2. There are different resilience, there are different qualifications and eligibility. It's much broader. Under CPACE, you have wastewater system, you have resiliency, you have water in there as well. You have storm level, storm surge, hurricane, and we've expanded that to both retrofit and new con, because under the old statute, it was only wind mitigation was only available for retrofit. This is going to be an interesting test. We've already seen one county, Broward County, basically saying that, well, because of the statute, we have to have a whole new JPA, and concerned about that going forward. And this is something where really I just want to say to all the members here and anyone who's not yet a member, but if you do it, or if you are involved in Florida, I think it's going to be really important that we all work together on territorial protection and expansion in Florida. This gives us an opportunity to expand CPACE in a lot of areas that have been very resistant to us in the past, because bringing us in inherently would have brought in R-PACE or would have required a local government to figure out how to do CPACE. Now it's not. Now they don't have that issue. They can simply say, we will allow the blank program of CPACE with a 163.082 program to come into our area, and they don't have to try and make a distinction between the two. But just today we got a termination letter from one jurisdiction in Florida on the west side of the state, and these things are going to continue. We don't know why they're doing it, but we do know that it is such a good market. It is such a powerful market for a lot of us, that all of us working together and sharing our resources to try and expand and protect Florida is going to be very, very important going forward. That's it.
All right. So yeah, thank you so much, Michael. Yeah, and actually, yeah, thanks to bring up that point that yes, the law still has not been signed by Governor DeSantis, but we keep definitely keeping our fingers and toes crossed that any time now that will occur, or otherwise it'll just simply just go into effect without his signature. So, all right, but you're still hoping that does take place. All right, so in terms of the more highlighted states that we're working on here, so let's now go ahead and move to Minnesota, where again, this too was kind of a little bit unexpected opportunity, but again, thanks to the leadership of a PACE Loan Group, they were really helping with getting this particular effort through to make some enhancements and improvements to the existing legislation in Minnesota. So Bali Kumar, if you are here from PACE Loan Group, I'm going to hand the microphone to you, and you can talk a little bit more about what had taken place with getting this law passed. So go ahead.
Perfect. And I can be brief. So in Minnesota last session, there was a large player that wanted to expand PACE for agricultural purposes. And so We found out about that as it was already sort of pushing its way through the system, and we tried to tag on and increase what we think are sort of like common sense items for Minnesota, moving Minnesota from a state of the 20s to a state of the 30s. So moving things from 20% loan to value, 20-year term with a 20-year payback to 30% maximum LTV, 30-year term, and falling in line with other states where it doesn't require a required payback or savings to investment ratio. We had gotten on the bus a bit too late last session. So this session we were ready, and we'd already sort of primed the appropriate people. We worked with our lobbyist. Naveen Green Capital also had a lobbyist on the ground, and so our lobbyists and their lobbyists worked together, and we've successfully gotten Minnesota now. We think from a state of the 20s to a state of the 30s. We also brought it into the PACE 3.0 concept by including resiliency matters into the statute. So super excited about that. Nothing really else to share about that.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you so much, Bali. And again, congratulations to the efforts of Pace Loan Group on helping to get this amendment passed. So yeah, we're definitely looking forward to these enhancements moving forward in this state. So, all right. So those are obviously, were successful states and outcomes, but of course we got to also take stock and note that obviously some states we did work in weren't as successful this year. So we're going to run down quickly with these states and what had occurred this year. So starting first with South Carolina. So this too has been one of these multi-year efforts. And again, to acknowledge what early leadership was through Castle Green Finance to get basically this legislation started. So basically, we have been trying to get this through, and again, was a multi-year effort. And yeah, let me pass it now to Sal Tarsia again with Castle Green Finance, and he can tell you a little bit more about the efforts here. So go ahead, Sal.
Now, this one's going to be Amanda, so I'll pass the torch to her.
All right, go ahead, Amanda.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. So we had started to working in South Carolina into early sort of mid 2021. CPACE Alliance got involved in 2022. We had early success. The bill went through the Senate uncontested. Some version of it had passed in early years in 2017 as well. So it was not sort of unknown in South Carolina. In both of those years, last year and in 2022, we ran into issues that were somewhat unrelated to the actual PACE bill. We became subject to more policy, not uncommon. I'm sure everyone on this call that has been involved in legislation has experienced this to some extent, but we went this year after the crossover date where we were eligible to work through the House subcommittees. We were able to pass out of one of the House subcommittee, and it was only then in the very last days that we were told that the sponsor was asked not to take it to the floor. This year, there were other issues that were going on. So again, it got tabled for this year. So that being said, we made some minor modifications to the statute, which was essentially crafted amongst sort of a group of participants that are along the lines of, as we discussed in other jurisdictions. We had a lobbyist group, and we also worked with legal counsel to make sure that everything we were putting forth was valid, enforceable, would result in a valid, enforceable PACE. So we felt very confident with what we had put forth. Unfortunately, we ran into headwinds on the policy side. So we're going to pick it back up. Hopefully the rest of the CPACE Alliance agrees that it's worthwhile. It could be a very, a good jurisdiction. They're subject to, again, the proposed eligible improvements include resiliency and are more broad as in keeping with a lot of the later statutes that we're seeing. So we hope to see this come to fruition next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you, Amanda, for the update on this and what had occurred. And yeah, we're hopeful that, yeah, this is something we could explore again, certainly in the coming session. All right, so then let's go to North Carolina. I'm going to pass it already to David Schatz, where I don't believe that we can really consider this was completely dead yet. But David, certainly correct me if I'm wrong, that it is still live and we maybe still see that maybe there is one outside chance of hope to pass it. But go ahead. David, you might be on mute if you're there. No, actually, he might have left the call. So, all right. Well, I mean, so yeah, bottom line is that North Carolina, it was in the session here, basically trying to get through the legislative session, and there is still some possibility, I believe, that it could get through, but it still remains to be seen that it would be able to get through the rest of this session at this point. And I know Nuveen Green Capital also too has been one of these early leaders, really pushing for this effort. And again, we thank them for all their support and their effort to trying to get a CPACE enabling legislation passed in North Carolina. All right, so then let's move down into Louisiana, in which case I think I'll pass it to Michael Yaki, who was also working on this as a kind of an unexpected and sudden effort. So Michael, take it away.
Yeah, and this again, one of those opportunity things that came along. Someone introduced the bill for we think was CPACE. It didn't really quite say. It was kind of PACE. It was kind of commercial. Could have been residential. Anyway, Nuveen and Petros jumped in to see what we could do to try and help out. We rewrote the bill. We spoke with the bankers, but essentially, this is one of those things where you have to have worked this, even though we got this before session started, because it was a late start in Louisiana. So it didn't start until February. Even though we learned about this in January and tried to get our hands around it, the bankers basically were responsible for killing the existing PACE legislation that had been on the books in Louisiana from like 2009. They killed it in 2017. They still were like really happy with themselves for killing it, and weren't too happy that we were trying to come back and revive it, even though we were trying to revive it as CPACE with lender consent. And we pointed out to them that they were Louisiana banks that had in fact consented to CPACE in other states. This is a thing where, even though we didn't get it done, I would say there's very positive momentum going forward from sponsors and leadership. The bankers did not do themselves many favors in some of the stakeholder meetings that we've had with legislators. So I have a feeling that this is something that will come back if we decide to make it a priority next session. So Louisiana, feeling good, 2025.
All right. Thanks so much, Michael. And then, so then let me go quickly actually through the next couple of states just for the sake of time. So with Arizona, this too was a multi-year effort, and we were really trying to move along a bill there. But the complexion of the legislature and really kind of the difficulty in trying to get through the committee process and then through the legislative process, it just made it impossible, I think, at this time to try and get a bill through. So it's something we'll continue to monitor, but I think at this point, it's not necessarily something I think that CPA is looking to move through and do, just given the legislative climate right now there in the state of Arizona. So it also too was something that was championed by Nuveen Green Capital at first, and that they were trying to move to try and get something done in Arizona, and then CPA has come in to also be part of this effort to provide more resources. Then in Missouri, this too was also one of those opportunistic opportunities where we were trying to find a way, at least to increase what the kind of allowable term was to provide financing within the state of Missouri's program. But we found that as we were getting through the process, there was some filibustering that was occurring. And basically that they kind of ran out the clock and we weren't able to get any further progress on that bill at this point. And so that's the reason why we weren't able to get something through, but who knows, maybe that could be something we could revisit, of course, in the next session. And then finally here in New York State, this was actually something that literally just did come down today, that unfortunately, while it did get this bill get through the state Senate in this case, for a second year in a row, where this also has been a persistent effort of ours, It did not get through the assembly again for the second straight year of this session. So just very quickly, I'm going to turn to Michael Yaki again too here, just to kind of maybe explain a little bit more about what occurred here.
Sometimes you get in life professional legislatures. New York is one of them. California is another. Congress is a good example where staff believes that they know better than anybody else. This is one of those examples. We talked with staff twice. They did not bring up any issues with the bill, and then all of a sudden, at the last minute, they said, "Oh yeah, we have some concerns about it." We tried to make amendments to it to address those concerns, and then they just moved the goalposts on us, and then we ran out of time. We'll try and look at talking to them later on. It's clear that leadership in the legislature knows that New York State is way out of touch with the rest of the country in terms of CPACE, that they are punching so far below their weight. It's almost embarrassing. Notwithstanding that, they were not willing to roll over one committee staffer in the Energy Committee in the Assembly, despite the fact that it passed the Senate with blazing colors, to get this bill forward. So we're still stuck with the dysfunctional New York State statute for yet another year at least. And but I think that we need to make it. I think we need to make a try. I think all of us in the industry know that New York can and should do better. That they talk a very good game. They just don't play it very well. So we'll try again next year.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Michael, for providing that context. So then, just to wrap up here in terms of just what we've been doing with these session and maybe where we're going to go moving forward. So the bottom line is that, with all the states we just actually went through here, it's a possibility we're going to re-engage with some of these states that did make some of that progress. And so, we'll definitely evaluate the situation in each of the states, and then we'll come to a determination as a coalition here about where do we want to basically undertake these efforts again and remain in that persistent kind of mode, kind of way of thinking, that mode of thinking. Then also too, while we were in the midst of this legislative session, we were getting inquiries and getting certainly some interest about basically finding ways to work with other states as well. So for example, the state of Iowa, and New Hampshire, Alabama, and Arkansas, just to name a few, have definitely also been getting piquing some interest from some of our members and other constituents in this case, to basically go and try and do something with those states, in which case in New Hampshire and in Arkansas, there already are legislations. So those could possibly be efforts where we can improve upon legislations. And then Iowa and Alabama are states where there is no current CPACE legislation in place. And now we're just trying to find a way to improve upon those particular, to get those particular legislations in place. And then certainly, as we mentioned here, there's always these opportunistic opportunities. And we did actually seize on some of those this year. And so again, likewise, we might definitely look for those, later this year. And then certainly when sessions are back in session in 2025. And then certainly, in terms of then the programmatic approach, we are also looking forward to launching these local programs in Georgia, and as well as we've also been putting a lot of effort into New Jersey, in which case, this has been also a multi-year effort since basically an updated legislation was passed and signed into law in August of 2021. So we're working very diligently with NJEDA to try and get this program launched sometime later this year. So that we can start doing some transactions and getting these opportunities done within that state. So definitely a lot to look forward to and looking ahead to, as we certainly would then prioritize for the rest of this year and into 2025. All right, so that pretty much is the presentation portion of our webinar today. And now we'd be happy to take any questions from the audience. You can go ahead and unmute yourselves, and you can gladly ask any questions about any of the states that we certainly ran through today. So fire away if you folks have any questions.
And
Hey,
also,
Nicholas, I'm sorry, Nicholas, could I say something? This is Michael.
Sure.
To all of you here, I mean, we're doing a lot of this work with basically spit and glue and about 4 to 5 core companies that are trying to expand the markets in these states. And I would just say to all of you, we know a lot of, some of you are constrained, but every little bit, every one-time contributions from companies like Green Rock and uh, Imperial have really helped out a lot in terms of our ability to deal with the lobbying issues that we have going forward. And most of these states, you just cannot do it without a good lobbyist. We've had some fantastic lobbyists get us through in the legislation expanded, but then we also have to get it implemented and rolled out in the states as well, and that costs money too. So I'm not saying that we need everyone in there, but it would sure be nice. If there's a particular state that you're interested in, contact Nicholas or Cliff and see how you can help out, because we're doing everything we can to roll this out, and legislative committees working as hard as they can to roll these states out as quickly as possible. But the more, the merrier, and the more resources we have, the faster we can do it.
Great, thanks for noting that, Michael. And I think, yeah, that's certainly valid. So given the lack of time, actually, we do have here, we want to be respectful of people's time. If you actually do have any questions about any of the states that we went through, definitely feel free to email Cliff and I, and we'll definitely see what we can do to help answer your questions about any of these states. And again, as a reminder, this recording will be made available on our YouTube channel sometime tomorrow, so you can be able to refer back to it and have access to the slides. But yeah, we'll probably also we'll circulate this presentation as well so that you have it. But again, we don't want to foreclose your opportunity to have questions. Definitely contact Cliff or myself, and we'll be happy to go ahead and do that. So, all right. So again,
are there any burning questions though? I can hang around if people have some burning questions. That's all. I'm just saying.
All right. Any burning questions? All right, well, it doesn't sound like I'm hearing any. So, all right. So then again, we appreciate you folks joining us today for today's webinar. And then just really quickly, as a kind of another additional plug for our program administrator roundtable events that we're doing in this case, and as well as our own member meeting that we're going to be holding too in late September. So we have sent out information, including links to Eventbrite, to register for the event. So again, if you might have even previously had accepted a calendar invite from Cliff, that's not basically going to indicate you've registered for any of our events. We're asking that you make sure that you do click on any of those Eventbrite links in the email that we've sent previously, and that you have to go in and provide your information so that we know that you're registered for any of these events. And at the same time, too, we have also circulated information about a hotel block that we have secured, so that you can also get lodging for staying basically in Chicago for these particular events. So again, we encourage you all, when you can, please make sure that you're registering for each of these events. And we definitely look forward to having you all certainly in Chicago later this year in September. So with that, thank you so much for joining us today. And we certainly will be in touch with you folks, like I said, with these materials and the webinar recording. And we hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, everybody.
Thank you very much.